Lich Happens Lore Part 3 The Conqueror in Red. I began helping the elves rebuild the ruined parts of Silbel, and by combining their magic with my own, we were able to create a thriving village in the forest. After the village had recovered, I went to the three May-Ors and instructed them on more efficient uses of the magic crystals I had delivered. After all, why wouldn't they want the magic to benefit the whole of the village, rather than just a few? When they were reluctant, I told them it would be easy, and to try. Or their citizens could always come to Silbel and learn to use the crystals and natural magic themselves, and cut out the middleman. At first they scoffed, but when they didn't listen, more than half their villagers had come to be my pupils. Silbel had more than tripled in size in under a year, and was now a haven for humans, elves, gnomes, gnolls, and all different types of small ones. With the growth, I began to think uniting the villages into a nation may be better. I went again to the three May-Ors and told them that if they joined the new nation, they would gain the benefits that our citizens realized: magic, education, trade, and fellowship. The only catch is that they would no longer be in charge, as I would be installing one of my chosen pupils to oversee the upgrades to their village. I did not intend it as a slight, but it would take too long to re-educate the May-Ors to work within our system, and run the villages at the same time. They rejected the idea at first, but then I told them of my plans to build a rival trading post, right near their town, that would cut off the need to venture into their villages. They agreed, begrudgingly. To help them accept the inevitability, I told them they could lead again once they had been trained and graduated from the academy in Silbel, if that was still their desire. Things went on like this for a while, with Silbel becoming the de facto capital of the new nation that we named Renaris. I always loved my days at the academy the most, but I was required to spend more and more time attending to the growth and stability of Renaris. Our growth demanded more food, and the size of the settlements meant that we were now on the map for not only thieves but other nations as well. I knew from my time in the Dragon Lord's court that these were problems that were not solved overnight. They were dealt with through planning and diligent effort. The academy would be my tool to solve those problems. My pupils took over teaching magic so I could teach more martial disciplines. I taught hunting to bolster our ability to gain food. This, in conjunction with the elves' natural farming prowess, would supply our settlements well into the future. As for the matter of our defense, I came to find a certain zen in training our would-be defenders. That first class was the toughest, as I intended them to train the next generation, and so on. But soon enough, the Red Guard, Renaris' elite defenders, were born, and we would no longer need to fear raiders or other nefarious beings. Within 10 years, the nation grew to rival the other 4 nations of the continent in terms of trade. After gathering that much attention, the other nations became fearful, and our closest neighbor decided to try and use their military to take over. That was a very unfortunate miscalculation on their part. 10 years' worth of my shed scales allowed us to produce more than enough dragon mail for the now substantial Red Guard, and with the training I had provided, and myself at the head of the defense force, we were able to rout their military and push back into their lands. We rebuffed them so easily that the nation's leader immediately treated for an alliance instead. I heard their terms, but informed them that they would be getting the same deal I gave the May-Ors. I would accept them into my nation and give them the full benefits as long as they swore fealty and accepted that I would install a leader of my choosing for each of their villages and cities. Or I could simply lure away all their tax-paying citizens and watch them fall apart on their own. They eventually agreed. The next closest nation saw what happened and, rather than be destroyed, were absorbed willingly and joined. They chose to have their leaders educated by me and evaluated, and most I returned to their stations. I thought it best to reward such forward-thinking behavior. 30 years had passed, and the nation of Renaris had absorbed most of the continent, with only 2 of the 4 neighboring nations still holding out. Our trading posts and their nations were gradually becoming the hub of trade and diplomacy in their lands, and this did not sit well with their leaders. The trading posts were constantly attacked by mercenaries and other rogues, but they were always rebuffed by the Red Guard. After enough attacks that I could no longer ignore the obvious backing of the nation's leaders, I delivered them terms. They would join willingly, or I would allow all those that wished to emigrate from their lands sanctuary before conquering the cities that are still holding out to put an end to these attacks. After a day, the leaders of the two holdout nations sent envoys saying they would willingly join and were going to host a celebration to ring in the uniting of the continent under Raltimathrax, the Conqueror in Red, as they had chosen to dub me. I was glad to finally be done with this, so if they needed pomp and circumstance to join then, I would allow it, so long as it made the world safer for the small ones. The Grand Unification Day Festival, as it came to be called, was a perfect day. Sun high, not a cloud in the sky, and the grounds were full of the smell of fresh food and the cheers of a land about to be completely at peace. The grounds of the festival had a special stage in the center where I was to give an address before accepting the oaths of fealty from the leaders of the nations. But as I ascended the dais to give my speech, a calamity began. The grounds began to glow a sickly pale green. Multiple figures throughout the crowd began to raise glowing green daggers, then plunging them into their chests before falling to the ground. I remember hearing the panic screams before a loud crack. My legs gave way as I collapsed. The light left my eyes, and then all was silent. The next thing I remember was rage. The same searing rage that filled me when I chose to defend the elven village. I stood up from where I had collapsed and saw the two cackling lords of the holdout nations delighting in the mischief they had caused. As I stood up, they squealed in delight. "He rises, just as the wizard said he would," said the First Lord. "Good. Let us test out the orders, then. You there, dragon slave, kneel before your new masters." I slowly marched forward, to be in front of them, and lowered my head. They began to laugh, and then once again the rage began to overflow. I looked up, and with all my might, roared. But it wasn't just a roar that came out of my mouth. Sickly green flames erupted, burning away their flesh from their bones. But they did not die. They stood there in agonizing pain, wondering why the necromancy had failed, and how I had retained my control. The spell was supposed to kill me and raise me as their undying servant. I looked into their cold eye sockets and told them the magic collected all the souls of those poor innocents, and instead of binding me, it concentrated them in me, empowering me with the necromantic magic they failed to use properly. And now I would turn them into servants in undeath to fix this world they aimed to break even further. I raised those that could be revived that day, but so many have been lost forever. The senseless slaughter due to the greed of the two lords changed me. I would make an example of their capitals, tear them down brick by brick, and show that all who oppose Renaris would meet a similar fate. If I had to unite the world by taking it, I would. Of course, I would first try diplomacy and have them unite willingly, but if they rebelled or chose violence, then I guess Lich happens.